Hello everyone and welcome to this chapter of system designs and acquisition. As the name suggests, the organization will be considering to design their system, and then there would be some important components or the key elements or the factors that every organization need to consider before they acquire a particular system. These are the learning outcomes that we will be discussing in detail in our further chapter. Now, as we know, that system design is an important stage in the system development life cycle. So, in the system design, the two elements are very important, or the two designs are important, which is the logical and physical design. So, first is the logical design. In logical design, we would be discussing, or the organization would come to improve the business process. A business process can typically include the identifying jobs requiring new employees and approving those jobs, analyzing the requirements of those jobs, posting those jobs positions, and recruiting applications from the labor market, tracking the applications through the recruitment process, and selecting, of course, finally from the recruiting pool through the use of selection tools such as interview applicants that best fit the job requirements, and bringing new hires on board and placing them in their job. As we can see this, in this example, the whole process, the whole business process is discussed here. And that would, of course, require HR programs associated with these processes are HR planning, job analysis, recruiting, and applicant tracking, selection and placement, and then recording the whole process of that individual. So it means that we would be discussing about the flow of the logical processes involved when an organization is hiring an employee. Whereas in physical design, the translating business process into physical system that includes simply the hardware or software. That is, the acquisition of new employees, in which a thorough and careful analysis of the staffing process, logical design would permit the company to determine that it needs a particular level of workflow process and web enablement to track applicants and allow the posting of jobs online and online applications to be posted for that particular job. That is a physical design, or simply we can say the software or hardware required to support the logical process. So here we have two views in HRIS regarding the processes that we are talking about. First, it is the data perspective. In data perspective, it only talks about such as name, address, degree received, work experience, skills required for the job. It doesn't have any concern regarding how the data would be utilized within the organization. It only is concerned with the data that we are gathering. It focuses on analysis of what data the organization captures and uses, and on the definition and relationships of the data, while ignoring how or where the data are used by the organization. Similarly, the second is the process perspective. It focuses on business processes and activities in which the organization engages, in how the data flows through the HRIS. This is just simply the opposite reflection of data perspective, where we ignore the process and we were concerned about the data only. Here we are concerned with the process, we are ignoring the data only. So therefore, it means the input of data into system, the flow of the data through the systems, and the storage of that particular data. For example, receiving applications, sorting, scanning, resumes, to determine the interview pool, scheduling interviews, reporting candidates information for legal purposes, and so on, but not the data definitions and relationships. So it is the process rather than the data. Now here we will be talking about the logical process modeling with data flow diagram. In logical processes, it includes the DFDs, data flow diagrams, and in that heading we would also be discussing few smaller definition or key elements or concepts in that DFD. The process model is basically describes and represents the key business process or activities that would be conducted by the organization, such as applicant tracking through data flow diagram. It is basically the graphical representation, we can say, of key business activities and processes in the HR system. The boundaries of the system, the data that flow through the system, and any external individual or departments that interact with that system are discussed in that particular DFD. Advantages are basically the graphical representation and understanding rather than in black and white. In black and white, things could be sometimes boring, sometimes complicated, sometimes less understood. Whereas in graphical format, the same flow can be understood very clearly. So here are the components: entity, any user who's interacting with the system. Data flow represents the movement of single piece of data from point to point through the system. Whereas the process represents a business activity. The goal of each process is to change or transform input data into a useful output. Example, creating an application record, updating an employee's record, creating and recording yield ratio report, reporting equal employment, opportunity commission data on applicants. Data is stored, of course, is finally storing the data in the system, or we can say the data at rest in the system. So now here we would be discussing about the creating and using the DFD. Most DFDs for the integral business systems are very complex, consisting of hundreds or to thousands of processes, data flows, and data stores. Therefore, DFDs are recognized by the modeling into the individual processes and components. That is, simply we can say creating and using the DFD is more effective when the DFDs are more simplified and broken into subsections or departments. Now here we have two levels in DFDs. First is the context level diagram. It is the highest DFD level. This diagram describes the full system, its boundaries, the external entities that interact with the system, and the primary data flows between the entities outside the system and the system itself. The context level diagram contains only one HR process, that is one activity. It could be the application process, it could be the the skill set process, it could be the decision making by the higher authority regarding any exit interview maybe. So it includes only single activity or business process. It is then further broken into greater detail on the level 0 diagram to provide a clearer picture of the HR business process. The level 0 diagram contains the major system process and the data that flow between them. But we can say the context level plus 0 level diagram is equals to the balancing DFDs that we have. We would be, or in simple words, we can say the context plus 0 level diagram is also known as the balancing DFD. Means whatever you have discussed or elaborated in context diagram must also be within the 0 level diagram. That is, the further detail should not include or exclude any typical point in the in both the diagrams. So that is the balancing DFDs. Now here is the presentation of context level versus level 0 diagram. As we can see here, every diagram is given a label, and 0 applicant tracking system is the main processing unit here, and the arrows represent the flow and the direction of the process. And ultimately that is broken into further detail, and that detail is typically labeled accordingly and into 1.0 and 2.0 as we can observe. And D1 is applicant files where the file is stored, and D2 employee file ultimately is stored when the new employee is being taken on board. So these are the further details. If we can say this detailed version where the entities, that is the applicants, human resource management department, and the management, of course, is the entities represented in the same diagram, but in the zero applicant tracking system from the left is detailed into the level 0 diagram, or the whole process is being given in details. So now we will be discussing the second main component of designing a system, that is the physical design. Physical design is simple, that we discussed earlier. It talks about the hardware or the software that is required for further supporting the business process or the logical process. By this point, the organization should have a strong understanding of its current operations, a set of requirements for new system and new logical model for how it wishes the system to operate. Once the system has been designed and logical models new system have been tested against the business requirement, the organization will move to the physical design phase. In this particularly involves 4 to 5 major activities to determine whether or not there is value in continuing the system design and actual implementation process. It also important in determining the hardware and software options, and maybe further requirements that are needed in if we apply the new logical model. Also determining where to obtain the hardware, of course, or the software, maybe vendor purchasing in building our own software, and also it needs to implement on a schedule basis, not on a random basis, and must be having a particular schedule, and the potential potential vendors should be worked out, and if the system software is to be obtained externally, so vendors selection is important, that we would be discussing later on this chapter. So there are 3 choices in physical design. The first step in the design phase is to determine how the proceed would be taking place with the physical design. Second option is to make changes to only the HR business process without implementing a new or upgraded technology. Finally, the option that an organization can choose is to implement the business process change along with new or upgraded technology. It means including the both one. Is it necessary for the first step to design a phase, or we should eliminate or exclude or include some process to determine how to proceed with the physical design? Second option is to make changes in the HR business process. It is not necessary that we would be implementing or upgrading the technology. It is simply we can change the flow of information or data. Maybe we can say in our organization, the recruitment department would be having a problem regarding hiring employees, or we would be having an extra additional step that is making hard for the employees to process the information, or it is taking too much time and getting expensive for the organization. So what we would do is that we would eliminate that process simply in the human resource management process, not rather than hiring technology which is costly, or upgrading the system, which of course takes time, and it also requires the new training and skill development for the employees. Finally, we can do both. We go for the business process amendment as well as to support that amendment and through the system acquisition, or we can say the new system that we can take for the support of that particular step that we have involved in the process, or the change that we have made in the logical process. Now here we can see how to acquire when we talk about the software acquisition strategies. Simply, if we are talking about acquiring a system, we have 3 main categories. Either we will make our own software within the organization. Of course, it has a problem which we can say company don't have the core competency in that system. It is not the task of that particular organization because it doesn't have that particular nature of activity or functionality to develop a software. So what they would do, they would go for the commercial off-the-shelf software, in which they would be taking different vendors into consideration in terms that their software would be giving some sort of functionality, or maybe meeting the project criteria to 90 or 70%, or we can say we can amend ultimately if we need to. The vendor may be providing us a built-in general software. Most of the time it is general, and any organization, if it buys COTS software, then it is quite easily applicable to integrate with our own HRIS system. Of course, it has some shortcomings as well. It could be expensive, or it could be time taking, or maybe it could be, depending on the nature of the software that we are adopting, but it can in a short time that is readily available in the market. But it's not, the main problem is that it may be giving the organization a functionality of say 70% rather than 98%. So we would be selecting among those softwares that is available, or we can say purchasing COTS software, and then amending, increasing the level of functionality from 70 to 90%. That concept is known as a vanilla approach by the organization. Either we apply both of these, or we can acquire the system software from third party, or the end, which expertise we don't have. So what it would happen is that in this approach, the vendor will provide us according to our needs. It is flexible and short. We can have it in a shorter bit of time, but it's quite expensive, and of course it needs a lot of training and experience towards our employees as well, so that they get familiar with the software. So every software, every strategy has its pros and cons. So it depends how an organization is approaching towards changing their HR process, and accordingly they would select the vendor. But when we are selecting the vendor, we need to be more focused on the business requirements that we want to fulfill, rather than acquiring or purchasing COTS software, standard software that meets only 70% rather than 98% or 90% that we need. So we have to make a choice between them, and we have to make sure that the request for the proposal, that is RFP, when we are giving to the vendor, is very specific, that what we want to have amendments in the system or functionalities. And we have to keep it simple. DFDs help a lot in simplifying our processes, because we have a pictorial diagram, and we have a clear mindset, or we have a clear vision of what we want, and then we can simply make it in place. So in terms of vendor selection, we have to consider three main points regarding the functionality, that how fully the functionality of the HRIS meets our HRIS needs, what our requirements were, and does the software gives all the requirements functionality, or the second thing is the IT architecture and IT integration, whether the HRIS that we are adopting from a particular vendor will be standalone system, or a network-based system, or web-based system, and these things to be considered when we are selecting a vendor. Of course, price makes money makes the mayor go. Of course, if the price is the implementation process and other invisible and visible costs would be balanced. That is, of course, we have visible price that we are directly paying, any visible cost that we can take the maintenance costs into consideration here when we talk about the price. Now, assessing system feasibility. This is also very important when we are selecting a vendor. In assessing system feasibility, focuses on the current technology capabilities of the organization and the technological capabilities required for implementation of the proposed system. Do we have the guts to go through the process or adopting the change? Do we have the capacity or technological capacity to acquire it completely? So So this is something that must be taken into consideration to the hard. Now, hardware and software exist to implement the system, or are they practical to obtain? Or do we add on or patch the current software, or start from the scratch? Does our organization have the ability to construct this system? Can we integrate the new system with our current system or old system? These are the questions that needs to be addressed when we talk about the technical feasibility. Further, we also have to see operational feasibility. It focuses on how well the proposed system fits in with the current and future organizational environment, our strategy plans of the HR and IT departments, as well as within the organization's overall strategy. For example, a system, despite meeting technical feasibility criteria, may make such a drastic change in how the organizations operate, then that it may not have a strong chance of being successfully implemented. That is, our requirements are aligned with our strategy, and the system that we are adopting must also have a flexibility or adaptability or change absorbing capacity when we change our operations later on, because any system adoption is not that easy, and implementing is not that free of hurdles, and the cost that we pay or the company pays for the adopting an HRIS is not small, and the whole process takes a lot of time. So these things should be taken into consideration, and how well does the system fit with our organizational context? Will this make us better? How much will our organization change because of the new business and technical changes? How long will this take to do? And does the schedule fit our business needs? We have to squeeze what might be able, but we would be able to eliminate some components, important segments of the system. Do we have, or we can get the personnel to do this? Can people use this system? What kind of training do we need? So these things should be considered when we are assessing the system feasibility in terms of operational feasibility. Then there is the legal and political feasibility. Of course, simply we have to answer few questions that does the implementation of the system infringe on existing copyright? Do we have a problem with the copyright if we are taking into consideration a new software? Are we violating any antitrust issues by implementing the system? Do we have a contract with other companies that do not allow use the newer software? Does the system violate any governmental policies? Does the system violate any foreign laws? Maybe this question would be significant for global companies who have operations in multiple countries where different laws and require different practices supporting the capture and use of HR data. For example, we can take any example regarding Uber functionality in Pakistan, Uber functionality to China and USA are quite different. So therefore, the system implementation and the outcomes are quite different. Further, who is likely to resist the implementation of the system? It should be considered. Who may win or lose as a result of this implementation? What is the risk of the system sabotage? What would we have left with the system if the system is being sabotaged? So these are assessing system feasibility critical points that need to be considered. Further, not but the least, economic feasibility. What we are paying is worth paying, or the cost of developing, implementing, and running the system are what the benefits derived from its use. What we are implementing is going to give us value in the organization. It should be considered. So with this, we come to the end of our chapter, and thank you for joining in.